smaller group like this because you can ask questions and, get some of those little extra attention from Jenny and CaringTide.
Do you have any announcements you want to make before we get started?
Um, I do. We have our big spring community event this month on Saturday, March 22nd at the Classic Fun Center in Orem. This is open for all ages, all families. It is a free event for United Angels Foundation families and their entire immediate family. If you have extended family or neighbors or classmates that you want to invite, they are welcome to come as invited guests. There's a small entrance fee, but we'll have the whole skating rink, the inflatables, and just a really great venue to have some good community time together and get connected and have a great time with your family. So we hope you guys can come.
Okay. Well, with that, and Sylvia, I know you've heard this before too, so you're welcome to stay, or if you need to leave, I understand. But we'll just get started. And just so you know, from a planning perspective, this is about an hour and 15-minute presentation. So if you need to drop off tonight, I understand how life is. It's busy. We're all doing our very best. But we do want to try to give families all of this information so that they can apply it to what their family's facing. All of us are at different ages and stages in our planning process. And we will be sending the recording out. So it's very detailed. I don't want you to be overwhelmed tonight, but you probably will be. And so that's okay. Just give yourself grace and we'll just help you start from where you are in the planning process. So with that said, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll make sure and go back and answer those for you. I want to read this before we get started. CaringTide respects every individual's right to express who they are. In one-on-one discussions, we will use person first or identity first language based on the person's preference. In group settings, we will use a mix of the two in hopes of having everyone feel like they are being included and respected. So with that said, I am Jenny Dopp and I am the director of CaringTide. And I am also a chartered special needs consultant. And so that just means that I have special designation for planning and helping families with disabilities. So this is my family. I have 4 children, ages 27 down to 18. And my second son, Jackson, is there in the gray sweater vest. And he has a rare chromosome duplication. It's 7q 11.23 duplication, as well as autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression, ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder. We kind of have alphabet soup going on at our house. And we found out about Jackson's disability when he was 5 months old, 5 months in utero, I should say. And just at a doctor's appointment and ultrasound, we discovered that he had a brain structure anomaly. Just enlarged brain ventricles, a thin corpus callosum, you name it, all of the things happening. So we thought it would just be delayed development. And then when they finally mapped the genome, I know I'm a little bit of an older parent here, we finally were able to identify that he had this rare chromosome duplication. And that put me on my professional path of helping families like mine find resources and information. First of all, 10 years as an executive director for a nonprofit, and then also about 7 years with the Utah Parent Center, developing the transition curriculum for the state of Utah. And so this has been a journey, a labor of love, both professionally and personally, trying to help families connect with resources, information, and training. And about 3 years ago, Brady Murray and I met. He has 2 sons with Down syndrome and 1 son with 22q deletion. So he has also been in this world for several years helping families. He is a CFP. He's also a CHSNC, so Chartered Special Needs Consultant, and a certified financial planner. And one day his wife, Andrea, said to him, you have done a great job with our finances, but what happens when that school bus stops coming? What happens when we are no longer here to care for our children? And so they started looking for people that could help direct their path. And there's a lot of great attorneys out there. There's a lot of great financial planners, but there's nobody that can address all of the areas for his boys. And so that is the genesis of CaringTide, to try to help families like Brady's, like mine, find their next step in the planning process. So the number one concern for parents typically is, who will care for my child if I can't? And it's not a matter of if I can't, it's a matter of when I can't. And that timeline is coming at a different point for each one of us. For my particular family, my husband Ryan was diagnosed with cancer when he was 46 years old. And that dramatically changed the trajectory for our family. Luckily, he's okay. He's just past his 5-year mark. But when I had to process that diagnosis, I had to think about, okay, what does life look like for my family once if he were to pass away? And that's an awful thing to think about. You know, you wrap your head around the diagnosis, and then my very next thought was, we had some term life insurance that we had put into place when we just got out of college. How many more years is left on that policy? Did that expire? And that's really not where you want your mind to be. And so, if we can do some of this planning when you're not in crisis, it really is the best strategy for planning for the future. So again, give yourself grace when we answer these questions, but where are you today in the planning process? What have you already put together? That's what we all have to ask ourselves. We then want to think, where do we want to go? What do we want life to look like? What are the goals for not only our family, ourselves, but our loved one with a disability? And then how are you going to get there? What strategies are you going to use in order to accomplish those goals? So what CaringTide does is help families tackle those really tough questions, and we help you find the answers. I'll give you one example. I worked with a mother in Massachusetts. She was a single mother. Her partner had already passed away. They had two daughters who were in their 20s with significant disabilities and no other family members. And so the challenge we were helping that mother tackle is who is going to be the next caregiver. And for every single family, the challenges are a little bit different because all of our families are different and the dynamics are different. So what we're doing tonight is understanding how to put together a life care plan, not only for your loved one with a disability, but for the entire family. And a life care plan is a coordinated strategy to incorporate family goals, individual goals, and a plan for achieving these desired successful outcomes with an eye planning for the individual with unique challenges. And the way that we do that is by like tapping into 3 specific categories. And there's a lot of pieces that go into a family plan, but for sure there are these 3. And things usually fall under these categories. The first is family resources. The second is estate strategies. And then the last one is a financial strategy. So examples of this could be your personal resources. Who's on your team? Who are the neighbors that are involved? Who are the teachers? Who are the family members? Do you have a great big extended family, or is it just you? What does your family look like? Now, what are the public resources that you've tapped into? Have you been able to get connected with DSPD, or are you sitting on a wait list like us for 14 years? Are you connected with Social Security? Do you have any other resources that you can leverage into your plan? What about your estate planning pieces? Do you already have guardianship done, or are you going to do an alternative to guardianship? Or are you just starting on this journey and you have a newborn or a 3-year-old? We also need to look at where you are in life. My oldest client is 46 years old with Down syndrome. He lives in Georgia, and his parents are in their 70s, and mom has just been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so we're doing some end of life care planning for them. So every single one of you are going to be at a different age and stage. We also need to look at what insurance you already have in place, because insurance can address a big chunk of your plan if we leverage it appropriately. But we need to look at your budget. We need to look to see what you already have in place, what you can tap into with an employer, and then what other pieces we can put in place to layer with that. And then, of course, the caregiving team, I should really have that first, because your caregiving team is going to be one of the most important pieces. Who's going to do what you do every single day when you're gone? Okay, so let's look at this piece. You'll notice that, let me go back so you can just see that one more time, but look at that middle logo right there in the middle of the circle, and watch how that changes to arrows. And the reason for that is because we do this planning, and when I work with families, it usually takes them about 6 months to 18 months to put a plan together because there's so many different pieces, and just the attorney piece will take you 2 or 3 months to put together. So once families put it together, it's not done. We really want to make sure we're updating our planning process. The reason for that is because relationships change. You know, I could be great friends with my sister this year, and in 10 years from now, maybe that relationship's fallen apart, or maybe she passes away. It really just depends upon the family. Your finances will change. You'll lose jobs. You'll gain assets. We always want to make sure we've updated our planning. I've updated my plan probably twice since we put it together, and I know Brady's updated his about 3 times. And so this is something that you kind of want to keep working on as the dynamics in your family change. We also just don't want to focus on the child with a disability. They take so much of our bandwidth and we love serving them. But when we're putting together a life care plan for the family, we really need to consider those children who do not have disabilities. And we also need to use that airplane analogy, putting on our own oxygen mask first so that we can serve everyone else around us like we do every day. I want to give you one other example. Even though Jackson is the one in our family that has significant disabilities, I have 3 other children and they all have various mental health challenges. Some of that is genetic and we manage that pretty well. And there's this other piece, it's called CPTSD, complex PTSD. It's actually a real thing where if you've been raised in this chronic level of stress, you can have reactionary issues or you can become unregulated yourself. You can have anxiety, you can have stress. If you've ever heard the term caregiver fatigue, it is absolutely real. Burnout is real, and we have to consider all of the components in our family. A lot of times when I work with families and I take them through this onboarding process, which is where I really do a deep dive on what's going on in the family so I can help them put together a life care plan. We'll get to a child in their family and they might say, "Oh, they're great. Everything's great." And that is a red flag for me as a planner because that means there's potentially some hidden mental health issues there with masking because that child has had to just keep everything going, even kill, because they know mom and dad's energy and resources are dedicated to Jackson. Now, I'm not saying that's the case for every single family, but it's just one example with my family where I really need to care for the needs of all of my kids, which I do as a mom, but also in this planning process. I also need to consider them. If I just say, okay, I'm just going to leave Jackson and all of the assets to my oldest daughter, Lexi, without considering what her life looks like, what her needs look like, what's her bandwidth, what's the family dynamic, where is she living? If she's living outside of Utah, then Jackson can't live with her because if he ever gets funded by DSBD, he would have to start over with waiver services in that other state. So there's a lot of dynamics to consider and just make sure you're taking into account everybody when you put your plan together. Okay, so again, this is the part where you get to wash the guilt away. Um, there's reasons why families have not done this planning. They're too busy dealing with everyday life. You know, you have specialist appointments, you're managing all these systems of care. Maybe you just think, you know what, it's going to be great. My child has Down syndrome, everyone loves him. Our oldest daughter will take him, it's going to be great. And we don't realize that there has to be planning done for that older daughter, not only to assist her, but legally, so we can save her on taxes and the death tax and probate and all of these pieces. So there's actual reasons why some of the slides that I show tonight, just know I'm going to go through this kind of fast because we are trying to give you this. We don't want to take your whole night. And so that's why we're sending you the recording so you can go back and read all of the bullet points on the slides, especially when we get to things like trusts and ABLE accounts. So just know these slides will be coming to you. Okay, so these are the timelines for the people around you that have neurotypical kids. You know, it's your neighbor, they have this beautiful baby, they're going through life, they're just trying to get that child to the graduation, and then that child is launched to college or moving out or doing whatever they're going to do as an independent adult. And then they move on to their own retirement planning, they're traveling, and eventually they'll pass. My family's different, and if you're on this call, your family's probably different. My journey started 5 months in utero, and we have not stopped since. It is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Every year looks a little bit different for our family. I remember at age 3, strapping Jackson into a special education school bus and just hoping that these people in the district that I was turning him over to were safe and it was going to be a good thing. And I was being a good mom by getting him in special education services. Going through school, there were a lot of ups and downs, negotiating retention in second and third grade, navigating different IEPs at different points that were either a great year or a tough year. Junior high, 14, getting phone calls from the school every day because of behavior issues, doing behavior assessment, a functional behavior assessment, and then having to put a behavioral intervention plan in place. Lots of different pieces. And then you think, oh, great, we're coming to senior year. It's all wrapping up, and the school wanted to graduate him because I had learned that I needed to make sure he doesn't accidentally graduate. So I thought I was doing a good job in asking them to track credits, and they were. But it turns out they were tracking them differently than how I was tracking them. And because it wasn't detailed in the anecdotal notes of the IEP, I had to fight the school district to make sure he wasn't going to graduate and so that he could participate in post-high with the district. And, it's just little things like that. It's not little, it was huge. It took so much energy. But then eventually that school bus does stop coming at age 22. And then we are focusing on things like vocational rehabilitation and, pre-ets and all of the different things that go into transition to adulthood, social security, guardianship. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, gosh, will I ever be able to retire? Because I want to retire and travel and do all the things I want to do one day, but I still need to make sure I'm saving enough for Jackson. And then, of course, is Jackson going to be buried with us? The cemetery that we grew up with is kind of filling up. Do I buy my plot now? Like all these morbid thoughts. But you have to figure it out because if I turn Jackson over to my sister after I pass away or Lexi or whoever's going to take him, they need to know because, I do want him next to me, as crazy as that sounds. So it's stuff I have to think about as a mom. And I just want you to realize there's people that get it. We're doing this too and will help you figure it out. There's a lot of options for you. This is another example of a traditional life care plan. So, a typical family, they, are looking at protection of assets. They're doing that Dave Ramsey plan of building up an emergency reserve, your first $500 or $1,000 to pay for emergency expenses when you need the brakes replaced on your car. And then as you get older and you have more employment assets coming in, you're able to save a little bit more and accumulate more wealth. And if there's a lot of privilege and opportunity there, maybe you'll even get to leave an endowment in Jackson's name one day. But again, our family is different and we have to plan for that. I'll give you some examples of how it's different with our life care plan. So, proper gifting and inheritance management. My father-in-law has some property up in Idaho. Let's say that in his trust, he was going to sell the property upon his passing and leave a portion of that to Jackson and each of the grandkids. So if he does that, that property will be named in Jackson's name, and therefore it would be an asset for Jackson, which would be detrimental, if not catastrophic, for Jackson's planning because that would be counted as an asset and it would potentially make him ineligible for Social Security and Medicaid. So that's the first big piece is we have to figure out not only grandpa's assets, but my assets as well. The next piece is the lifetime supplemental needs. So we need to figure out the direction or the theme around our planning. What is our passion? What are the needs? Do we want Jackson to have education? Do we want him to have a home that we provide? Or is he going to live in like a host home or a group home? What does that look like? What about guardianship? Is that the best fit for him? And I want you to know all of these topics, I could teach you an entire class just on that topic. So I'm just giving you like the bare minimum tonight, but just know guardianship is not your only option. This week in the legislature, in fact, I think it was today, supported decision making was moving through committees. And so we're hoping that eventually supported decision making or SDM will be a legal alternative for Utah. But right now we also have power of attorney, which we'll talk about in a minute. For Jackson specifically, power of attorney is a better way to go for him because he is able to understand what he's signing. But for you, guardianship and potentially conservatorship, if there's a lot of assets there, could be a better option. And of course, special needs legal planning. The other piece is who's going to manage that trust once you get it set up. Again, housing is a huge piece, if not the biggest piece of what you need to figure out the amount of funding that you'll need. And again, layering all of this together with the public benefits that Jackson could access. So I take families through these 9 steps, and I know that looks like a lot, and we're going to move through it pretty quickly tonight. So again, come back, watch the slides, and you can pause and rewind. So I just wanted to start with this first piece of the primary issues. Some reasons why families kind of get stuck is because they don't really know where they are. I'll give you one example. Some people have a diagnosis of 22q deletion. With that, there's a little bit of a spectrum. It's kind of like autism. So people that have kids with autism could probably relate. But, we aren't really sure when they're younger what the end is going to look like. And so what we advise families to do is plan for the worst. And like, let's say that they're not going to be able to live independently. They are going to need a high level of support. So let's plan for that so that you can have a really solid plan. And then if they are able to live on their own, if they are able to have gainful employment, great, that's fantastic. But let's plan for where we think they could be based upon your best knowledge at the time. My child will definitely need assistance over their lifetime. We have plenty of families like that have children with significant special health care needs. What about, I don't trust anyone to do as good of a job with my child if I'm not here. And so they just don't plan. But you know what? Mortality ends for all of us. It's a given. What is that line in Meet Joe Black? And nothing, everything is for sure in life. There's nothing for sure in life except for death and taxes. And so we have to really plan for this. So the second piece is putting together a family mission statement. So this is again your family values. What do you want the vision to be? What do you want the goals to be for the family? Not only just Jackson, but for every member. So here's an example. What do caregivers need to know about your child's expectations, about your children's expectations? Why is this important? Here's Brady with 2 of his boys hiking. I think that's in the Uintas. We respect the beliefs of each family member. We work together to help every member of the family reach their goals. And so when you're putting your planning together, have like a core principle that's going to guide you. You can use it when you're selecting caregivers, when you're allocating money for your neurotypical, for your children that don't have disabilities or your neurotypical children. Think about what each child needs and then plan accordingly. And that mission statement or the family values will guide you. The next piece is the letter of intent and also the emergency plan. So this is a day Jackson and I were up at the legislature testifying because of the wait list. And so I just included that because advocacy is huge, especially this year with all of the legislation for Medicaid cuts and 504 lawsuits. Just if whatever bandwidth you have, I'll just throw it in to make sure you're reaching out to your congressional delegation and advocating for funding for our kids with disabilities and also in the state. But an emergency plan should happen. We have the plan in place for when a life-changing incident occurs. What's going to happen in that first 24 to 48 hours? Again, I'll give you an example. Ryan, my husband, his mom was in a rollover accident this summer. She rolled her car. She had a stroke while she was driving on the freeway. She rolled her car front over back 9 times. And she was in the hospital for several months. So if she were a younger mom who had kids at home, her husband had to be up at the University of Utah for weeks. She was in there for weeks, and then she was in the rehab unit for weeks. So if you were a younger mom and that happened to you, what would happen to your child with a disability that had significant healthcare needs? Who's going to step in? So that emergency plan, the first 24 to 48 hours. The next piece is the letter of intent. And this is really that guidebook that you wish you would have had when your loved one with a disability was born. And we want to encompass a couple of different points in the letter. And again, I have templates for both of these documents to share with you for our clients. So we want to consider things like independence, financial well-being, quality of life, employment, education, and housing needs. And what that could look like is really starting from the bare bones. What's the family history? Let's say you have a 3-year-old. Does your 3-year-old need to know how you met, your partner? Because if you're gone, they'll want to know that information. Or what about if you carry the BRCA gene and you have a daughter? Are are these things that you want to outline in your letter of intent and so that your family will have the information they need? What about a general overview? What are your feelings about the future? What's Jackson's diagnosis? My sister doesn't know what 7q11.23 duplication means. She doesn't know that that's the Williams region duplication. Like, I need to spell everything out for them so that they'll understand Jackson and they'll understand how to care for him. Things like education. Jackson at this point is not really interested in a program like Aggies Elevated at USU or Wolverines Elevated at UVU. But let me list that there because he might be interested later, where he's only 24, he might, with the way his development is, he might be interested later. Employment, he works about 3 to 5 days a week at McDonald's, loves it. It's his autism superpower as far as that rigid routine. Even when I go through the drive-through for my Diet Coke, he doesn't break his script. I love it. But if a new caregiver came in and wanted to switch him to a different job, he loves McDonald's because he has a little, and the reason why he loves it is this one reason. He has a fingerprint that he can put on this cash register, and that like writes off the order so that they can give complimentary things to people at different times. That fingerprint is why he loves his role at McDonald's. And if I don't put that in there and they try to change employment without considering what's best for Jackson and what they think is best for Jackson, there could be some conflict there. Even simple things like when he was younger, he had to be the first in line when we ate dinner together at family dinners. He loves the blue plate. He wants everything blue, a blue hoodie, blue bedding. Make sure they know the components that make up your child and that make your child unique and special. Residential environment, do we want to leave our home in our trust and then have other people live here with Jackson? Do we want to sell it and use the proceeds of that to maybe buy a duplex, have Jackson live in one side, and then somebody else live in the other side? What do we want residential to look like? What about social environment? Because of Jackson's disability, social is huge. We are his people. We're his taxi driver. We're the people that go with him to see the new Marvel or Star Wars movie. We are his people. And so we need the next caregiver to understand they are now his people. And if they can't be the people, what are they going to do to build the social circle? Religious environment, if that's important to your family, typically community, depending upon your faith, is a huge piece. So we want to make sure that they understand what that would look like to change that dynamic. I'll give you one quick example. That mom that has Parkinson's, she was raising her niece and nephew, and they were Lutheran, and she was, I believe, Baptist. But they kept those kids going to the Lutheran church so those kids could still have the community that was attached to that religious environment. So again, lots to consider there. And then of course, medical care, which I'll talk about just in a minute, because I'm sure you could have a whole binder just on medical care for some families. And then the last two is behavior management. If I'm going to explain to my sister how to navigate a meltdown, I need to walk her through the stages. There's going to be a trigger. These are typically what triggers could look like. This is what rage could be. Screaming, running down the street, because can you imagine my sister stepping into her first meltdown without this information and her trying to chase after him in our little cul-de-sac? That could be really traumatic for everybody. But if she would understand, first of all, what the triggers are, let him rage, let him get that energy out, and then he can re-regulate and he can calm down. So, tell people the pieces of information they need to know. And then, of course, like we talked about earlier, the final arrangements. Now, just so you know, the letter of intent, it's not legally binding. However, some families have found it helpful in court proceedings to have that and say, this is what the parents wanted to know. And again, I'll just leave that up just for a minute so that when you go back and watch this, you can look at all of the reasons for the letter of intent. Here's one piece on the medical care notebook. This is twofold. So with a medical care notebook, this is detailed information about the medical piece and the care for your child. So that's for your caregiver. However, this can also be used for Jackson as an empowerment tool, especially when you're in those transition to adulthood ages and stages, 14 to 22. if we start to empower Jackson to have some autonomy with his medical care and his independence, he can start establishing either a digital or a paper binder of his medical records. So there could be a tab for, hey, these are the specialists. These are the dosage. This is the dosage. This is my cardiology um, results for this year. I'll give you one other example. With Jackson's chromosome duplication, he needs to go to the cardiologist once a year to have his aortic, um, to look for aortic dilation. Because if we don't replace that valve soon enough, it's possible that he could have an aortic aneurysm and pass away. And so it's imperative that my sister knows that he needs to go either once a year or for sure once every other year, who that person is, how you would work with insurance to make sure that's covered. But Jackson also needs to understand that. And he's really good about, he's really interested in the medical piece. So again, caregiver notebook, medical care notebook for your caregiver, your loved one that's caring for the person with a disability, and then also use it as a transition tool to help your loved one with a disability help to navigate their own medical care. Okay, let's talk about financial resources. So the left side is everything that's public. This is Medicaid, Medicare. Um, these are all of the things that care for basic sustainability. And it's kind of funny because it's not a lot of money and it doesn't care for everything, but it's supposed to help provide for the necessities. But on the right side is private sources of funding. So this could be things like ABLE accounts, the funding that's going to go into the Special Needs Trust, funding that you're putting together, and it will help to pay for the extra things. Could help continue to pay for the rent if Social Security doesn't cover everything. Also things like, we love to do this little beach trip every year and rent the beach for a weekend. So we want Jackson to still have that. So it could cover things like that. Also, I know this is a first world problem, but with his autism superpower, he's totally into politics. Right now, he's watching the State of the Union and he's going to tell, he came in here right before I joined this and he said, Mom, I'm going to watch ABC tonight instead of Fox. Do you want to watch with me? He just is going to tell me all the things about politics. So he needs to have a new computer and a new cell phone, a new smartphone. And again, that sounds like a luxury item, but for him, that's part of his mental health. That's part of social. That's part of his routine. So we have to build in those tools for him. Even things like haircuts and t-shirts, that it won't necessarily be covered by all of your SSI. So you need to figure out other ways to pay for it. Now, SSI can be its own little bear. And again, I could teach a whole class on this, which we do. But Social Security, there's two components to it, either SSI or SSDI, and I want to just touch on both of them. But the thing that you need to remember is that your loved one who's receiving SSI cannot have more than $2,000 in assets, $2,000 of assets in their name. And in order to qualify, they also need to meet Medicaid's definition of a disability. And so let's see, let me go back there. There's also a timeline associated with Social Security. So if you have a young child who's younger than 18, and depending upon it, it is depending upon the parent's income. If it's low enough, the parent's income, they could potentially qualify for Social Security. But if your income as a parent is too high, then that child will need to wait until they're 18 years old or older to apply for Social Security. And then again, you have to meet the definitions and the qualifications for Social Security. Let's talk a little bit about insurance. With Medicaid, most of the time, once you get Social Security, you will also get Medicaid health care. The other piece to Social Security is something called SSDI. Now, SSDI is awarded to individuals based upon work credits, and those work credits can come at different times in their life. For example, Jackson will never go on SSI because he has enough work credits. He started working at Lagoon when he was in high school, and then he's worked enough years at McDonald's. And it's based upon how old you are, how many years you've worked, and how much you've paid into FICA. Or it could be awarded to you based upon your parents if they are retired, based upon us if when we are retired. So Jackson never went on SSI. He went straight to SSDI. For us, that's a great thing because he gets a little bit more money than he would on just SSI. And he also doesn't have that $2,000 threshold for SSI. but he does have it for Medicaid. So just be aware there's some nuances like that. And depending upon your situation, I can walk you through that. Now, health insurance, because he went on SSDI, he's still on our health insurance till he's 26, and we could potentially work with our employer to try to keep him on. But if the employer wouldn't let him stay on, once he's on SSDI for at least 26 months, he could be eligible for Medicare. Now let's talk about Medicaid. Medicaid is, think of Medicaid like a house. There's like a window, a front door, a back door. There's lots of ways to access Medicaid. Medicaid is not Medicare. Medicare is typically for people on SSDI or when you're retired and older. I don't want to say elderly because I'm getting closer to those ages, but it's typically for an older demographic, older population. But when people say Medicaid, they just think of one thing and they think of healthcare. So Medicaid is actually two pieces that we want to talk about tonight. The federal government allocates Medicaid funding to every single state. And then those states get to decide how they're going to allocate that funding. And this is very simplified. It's a lot more complex than I'm making it, but just for simplification. So that Medicaid funding goes to the state of Utah, and then we do a Medicaid match to that. And so there's the Medicaid healthcare piece, and then there's something called a Medicaid waiver, HCBS. It stands for Home and Community-Based Services. And in our state, that's DSPD. It's our favorite thing. There's only a small group of people on tonight, so give me a thumbs up with your emojis if you are either on the wait list or you are funded and in services, just so I know who I'm talking to tonight. Lori, are you guys in services with DSPD? Just give me a thumbs up if you guys are
Um,
or on the wait
no, and
list.
I don't see a thumbs up, so sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. And Vanessa, okay, Vanessa's aware of DSPD, but Lori, do you know about DSPD?
Yes, I've checked into it and that and
Okay.
just not finished with everything. So yeah.
No, it's okay. I just want to see kind of where the knowledge level is tonight. So there's the Medicaid healthcare, and then there's also Medicaid waivers. And so with DSPD, if you're not already on the waiver, call them, talk to my friends there. They used to work with me on their intake line and get on the wait list. Some people think, why should I do that? Because we're never going to get off, and again, we've been on for about 14 years. But the reason why you want to get on is it tells the legislature who's in session right now that yes, there's more people on the list every year. We need to try to figure out how to allocate funding to that. Right now, there's like just over 5,000 people on the list, between 5 and 6,000. Jackson sits at around 2,000. When he first went on the list, he was more of like 1,000, 1,200. But you get your placement on the list based upon how long you've been waiting, but also how great of a need your child has. So because Jackson has a lot of capabilities where he has some more independence, that puts him further down the list, where people who are more critical are going to get funding ahead of him. So just know it is important. We've also received one-time pools of funding from DSPD 3 different times, where they'll give you like $10,000 of the ARPA COVID money, where we can use that for respite or allocate that for Camp K for a summer program. So just know there is benefit to being on the wait list, and it's just part of the process. Okay, so the next piece is determining your life care plan costs. And so I want you to think of this as a math equation, and there's all of these variables. The first variable is, how much do you need to retire? The next variable is how much do we need for Jackson? The next one is what are we going to do to allocate the funding as far as strategy, managing our portfolio, investments, and then the last piece is that insurance piece. So let me help you think about the funding piece, because we have to solve this equation and we have to consider all of these pieces in order to come up with that dollar amount about what we need for our child. So by far and away, the biggest expense is going to be housing. And I want to give you an example. I need to update this slide because these are based on Social Security numbers for last year. Last year, the most you could get from SSI was $943. This year, I believe it's $967 for Social Security. but I would want Jackson to live in Salt Lake. The reason for that is he doesn't drive, and I want him to be able to access UTA tracks. We have a great system north to south along the Wasatch Front, but not the best if you're trying to travel east and west. So if I put him in a rural area, that's really going to limit his ability to have social engagement and to connect with other people unless I drive him or the next caregiver drives him. So I would want him to live somewhere close to a tracks lane. So it would be about $1,400 for a basic 1 bedroom in Salt Lake. So I need to consider if I'm only going to get 967 this year for Social Security, if I was on SSI, how am I going to cover that gap and close the gap on the housing? What about your own retirement? And you'll see a calculation there at the bottom. Again, you can come back and watch this slide and read through that case scenario. But you have to figure out how much you're going to need. And right now we can leverage our own Social Security payments into that calculation. But with that talking about being cut, we can't always count on Social Security. So that would be an issue. What about quality of life? Again, that beach trip, that smartphone, that new computer, we need to allocate funding for that. What about your other children? Let's look at Utah State University. This 18,000 and change per year average cost for a Utah resident living on campus at USU. And so you can see that if your child doesn't get scholarships and you really want to make that part of that value statement, your mission statement, as far as education, how are we going to pay for that piece? What about if we need long-term care services? So again, Ryan's mom, a huge medical year for her. The national average cost of a skilled nursing home stay is over 100,000 per year. And it's actually, when I look at the national average, it's probably closer to 120. But we need to account for that either through a long-term health care policy or again, additional assets to cover that. And then what if we have aging parents that we need to care for? This was my scenario this past little bit. My mom passed away in 2020. My dad passed away in 2021. And at the end of life, they needed more support. And so that was up to us to help cover and also to help kick in a little bit for funeral costs. And then what if the worst happens and you have my scenario with a cancer diagnosis or one of the caregivers being killed earlier in their lives? So we need to cover that piece as well. And I know this is a really depressing topic, but I want to help you figure out how much is enough. So we do that through a blend of financial strategies. So we have those public benefits. Jackson will have Social Security and Medicaid, and then potentially I'll have Social Security. Also private assets. What have we been able to accumulate as a family? How am I going to cover the rest? Which type of insurance is the best? And then don't forget about your natural supports. So again, other children, extended family, neighbors, church community, who is it in your circle that can help you with the allocations of support for Jackson? Let's just do a really brief covered, slide here on life insurance. Again, we do deep dives into the life insurance and teach big classes on this. So if you are interested in that, please let us know. But your life insurance must be coordinated with your overall estate plan and trust. We can't just get a random policy and then not mention it in our estate planning. And I'll show you why in just a bit. Make sure your attorney knows about any life insurance you have, whether it's your personal life insurance that you've already purchased and put into place, or maybe you have a work-related policy. Because maybe you're thinking, great, I have 500,000 with my job, but you're forgetting that once you leave that position, that life insurance potentially goes with that, and you would no longer have that. So we need to cover that gap for you. The next piece is to make sure you have an insurance audit, and make that sounds a little more scary than it is, but we need to look at all the insurance that you have in place, all of the sources, and then see if it's answering that math equation of all of the different variables. The next piece, a lot of people forget this. They get the life insurance and they think, oh, that's so great, I have it done. And I leave my life insurance to my husband, and then I leave it to my kids, and it's great. But you know what? I'm really making a huge mistake there, because if I leave it to my kids instead of the trust, it's going to get allocated to my kids. One of my kids is Jackson, and that's going to destroy his plan that I'm putting together with Social Security and Medicaid, because that funding is an asset for him. So we want to have our spouse, potentially, if you like them, you leave your assets to your partner, and then it's always going to be the trust after that. Okay, so there's a lot of different kinds of insurance. The first one is group, and that is again your employer insurance. And this is great. It's hardly, I've never seen it yet be enough to cover everything. And so it's a great it's very inexpensive. It helps to supplement. A lot of times you can get that policy on your kids as well to help with burial costs, but just know that's there to supplement. The next piece is term insurance, and that's typically a 10, 15, 20-year term, meaning it's only valid for that many years. This was great when we got out of college. We weren't making a lot of money. And, now we're at the end of that term because we're older and now we have that cancer diagnosis. And so unless I can convert the term to a different type of policy, that's going to end in the next few years. So keep that in mind. There's also this theory out there from some financial planners online that say, you know what, term insurance is all you need. You don't need whole insurance. And the reason behind that is, in your younger years, you're building your assets and you're just getting the term to replace your income if you were to pass early. And that's true for a lot of families. It's a great philosophy. But for families like ours, we don't know what the future is going to hold for our kids. And so we actually have to have enough in life insurance to get through the end of life, because we're not only are we paying, are we accumulating those assets to cover our own retirement, but we're also trying to cover for Jackson and figure out what he needs to get to the end of life. And so there is whole life insurance that is available depending upon your scenario. This is not the best fit for everyone, but that's why we need to do the equation with you and figure out where you are. But whole life can have a permanent cash value. And Jackson can potentially have whole life insurance as well, as long as the cash value is not over $1,500. Remember that asset limit of 2,000? The same thing goes for insurance. We have to keep it really low for Jackson. And then I'm just throwing this out there so you can start to get introduced to the terms of different, terminology with different life insurance products. There's universal life, and that can either be permanent with IUL, meaning indexed, or VUL, which is variable. And that's talking about the market, tied to different pieces of the market as far as your investment strategy. So again, our team can walk you through all of that. And one piece that I want to throw out here is called a second to die policy. And that means after the second parent passes away, that life insurance policy would fund your special needs trust. So that is another way to do it with life insurance, and our team can help you with that as well if you want more information about that. So ABLE accounts. Again, I'm going to go through these slides kind of quickly, but think of an ABLE account as a savings account for Jackson. For long-term savings. Jackson, where he works at McDonald's, he would not be able to qualify, or another job, not just McDonald's. He wouldn't be able to qualify for a 401k or a Roth or something like that. And the reason for that is an asset that would be titled in his name, and it would count against his Social Security and Medicaid. And so an ABLE account allows Jackson to save money. You can put so much in an account each year, which I'll show you those limits in just a minute. But it's for extra money. It's like a shelter for Social Security. Let's say your representative payee account, your Social Security account, had $2,100 in it. Well, how many assets can Jackson have? 2,000. So we need to move that extra $100 somewhere if I don't want to spend it down for Jackson's needs that month. So I could just take that extra $100 and move it over to an ABLE account. There's a stable card, a little debit card attached to an ABLE account. So it's really easy to put money in, take money out. We use the money for what's called a QDE, a qualified disability expense. And the QDE can be anything like a haircut, t-shirt, movie tickets, that cell phone that he needs. And, it's a great way for him to have easy access to it. And some people say, well, I just want to use the trust. And that's great. But depending upon how your trust is set up, you might have to go through that trustee to get money out of the trust. Or if there's not a debit card attached to the trust, it's a big process to go and get money out of the trust at the bank. So an ABLE account is a really slick way to move money around and keep Jackson let him have the ability to access his funding. And again, I could do a whole class for you on ABLE, but again, come back in the recording to these slides and read through these bullet points. It went up this year. So this year in 2025, you can have up to $19,000 that you can put into the ABLE account each year. And then Jackson's working at McDonald's, so we can put an additional 15,000. But once he hits $100,000 in the ABLE account, then his Social Security would be paused until he spends that down. The other big key to an ABLE account is this Medicaid payback. And so when Jackson passes away, we would be able to use the ABLE funds to pay for funeral expenses. We would be able to settle the estate. But then when Medicaid is notified, or sorry, when the state of Utah is pushes through his death certificate and Medicaid is notified that he passed away, Medicaid would say, okay, from the date we started giving Jackson Medicaid, how much did we spend on Jackson? And then they could potentially come back into the ABLE account and claw back that funding. And there's 48 different ABLE programs out there that you could join potentially if they let people from out of state join. Luckily for us, Utah has a great ABLE program. There's a tax credit associated with it. And so for us in Utah, it really makes sense to be part of Utah's ABLE. And when I spoke with their director just a little bit ago, she said they're really trying to limit that clawback amount that they're not taking as much. And there's a lot of legislation being moved forward in the states to try to have that eliminated. But you do want to be thoughtful. There is a strategy. How much do you put in the ABLE? We don't want to put all of Jackson's inheritance and assets into the ABLE, but there is a way, or there is a reason why it could benefit Jackson. With that said, I have another client where her daughter has significant disabilities. She's not going out to movies. She's homebound. She's, at the home, needs a high level of care. Um, an ABLE account probably doesn't make as much sense for her because of the way they have their finances set up with the family and who the caregivers are. The special needs trust and putting everything into the special needs trust is really the best way for that family to navigate it. So there's not a right or wrong way. I just want to make sure you understand the pros and cons. And again, with our clients, we really help them think through that. We help them compare and contrast which ABLE program makes the most sense. Is Ohio's the best? Is Pennsylvania's the best for your scenario? Let's say you're moving or something like that. So let us help you think through that. The next piece we want to talk about is that estate planning section that is really a huge portion of your life care plan. And so we start by looking at the attorney that you're going to be working with. And we really advise you to work with an elder law attorney, somebody who's at maybe a CELA, a CELA, it's a certified elder law attorney. You don't have to work with a CELA. There's a lot of great attorneys out there just to make sure that they have a lot of experience putting together this type of planning. Before we dig into trust, I want to just introduce some other language to you or things to think about. So with an estate plan, the purpose of this is because you're wanting to reduce taxes, fees, and also avoid probate. If you didn't have any estate planning done, then your estate would have to go through probate, which takes more time and potentially more money. We also use estate planning for gifting and property and asset allocation. And also it really helps to kind of keep the peace in families because everyone loves each other and we all get along great. And then when somebody passes away, there's a lot of opinions and there are a lot of thoughts about how things should be distributed. And who knew grandma's rolling pin could cause World War III in the family, because somebody didn't get the asset that they wanted. And so when you're able to allocate everything in your estate planning, it really helps to keep the peace in families and you're doing that next generation a favor. Remember the HIPAA release. Once your child turns 18, you're going to be locked out of that electronic medical record on their birthday. It happens just like that automatically in the system. So plan ahead and either get a release of information so that I can still make Jackson's doctor's appointments, that I can get his lab results, that I can, talk to his clinical team, either through the release of information, through, again, not only just the doctor's office, but also your insurance company, because you'll be locked out of that information with your insurance company as well. The next piece is deciding that guardianship, conservatorship, supported decision-making, power of attorney, what's the best direction for your loved one. I want to just mention something briefly about power of attorney. There's two different types, springing and durable. Springing is what I have for my husband. My power of attorney for him springs into effect once he becomes incapacitated, or if he was going through some major situation that was documented in the power of attorney. So that springs into effect. Jackson's is durable. Once he signs that, it is in effect and it's valid until either he revokes it or another power of attorney is signed. So I will just mention with the power of attorney, again, a lot of people are trying to get away from guardianship and they just think, oh, I'm just going to have my child sign a power of attorney. But if your child doesn't have a cognitive level where they are understanding what it is they're signing, that power of attorney could be contested. The other piece is if somebody has them sign a new power of attorney, that new power of attorney is now what is in force, and yours might not be. So if there's somebody questionable in their life that might be trying to take advantage of them, and they don't understand what the power of attorney is that they're signing, and that would not hold up in court, that might not be the best route to go, and maybe either full or a limited guardianship in just a few areas could be the best choice for them. The last thing is a will. You should have a will. Both you should have one, your partner should have one. You should both have a will. And I'll show you a way that you can use a will as a planning tool. So these are the types of trust that you could have. There's a simple will, but there's also something called a testamentary will. And in the will, it says that I'm going to create a trust. So Jenny will pass away and a special needs trust could be created for Jackson based upon the language in my will. So that is one option. And depending upon the laws in the state, you'd again want to work with an attorney to make sure it's drafted correctly. That could be a tool for you if you do not have enough funding right now to potentially have other estate planning documents and trusts drafted. The second term is a special needs trust, and our community throws that word around, but it can actually mean different things. So there's a first party special needs trust or a self-settled special needs trust, and you'll see an SNT in a lot of written documentation. So that's what that means, is special needs trust. So if Jackson received a payout from an insurance company, a malpractice lawsuit, that check would come to our house in Jackson's name, and that is therefore an asset. And so we can't have that because we have that $2,000 threshold with Medicaid and Social Security. So our only option would be either to put part of that in an ABLE account, depending upon the amount, or to get a first party trust established. That is irrevocable, meaning it can't be changed. There is a Medicaid payback on a first party trust, meaning when Jackson passes away, I will not be allowed to pay for funeral expenses with the first party. I will not be allowed to settle the estate. Medicaid will come back and claw back the money that they calculate is what is owed to them. So that is the con with a first party trust. So of course, a third party trust is better, but that is not Jackson's money. It's grandpa's money. It's my money. It's the sale of my home. And it would go into a third party supplemental needs trust. And that can be created one of two ways. So Ryan and I have our revocable family trust up here. And, once the second parent passes away, the assets will be allocated to my other children. And then Jackson's piece, a special needs trust, will be created once the second parent dies, and Jackson's piece of the estate will go into that special needs trust. So that is one way to do it, and that is called a provision. The downside to a provision is it can only be funded after the second parent dies. It has to be funded later. So if you have grandma who is going to, that she's leaving money to Jackson in her estate, we need a different type of trust. So if you want to fund it now, that is option 2, a standalone third-party supplemental needs trust, and it can be funded now. So Ryan and I have our revocable family trust up here. Once the second parent dies, all the assets flow down to the kids, but Jackson's would go over here to the trust I already have open, and there's already money in it now. The only downside to opening a standalone and putting money in it now is there is maintenance that has to be done. So there's taxes that have to be paid and filed. You would want to invest the money that's sitting in that trust. And so you could decide who would do that. And we'll talk about that just in a minute with the trustee. The next type of trust is a pooled special needs trust. So in Utah, the pooled special needs trust is run through Turn Community Services. You don't have to use Turn. There's pooled trusts all across the country. It's where my testamentary will would say, I'm leaving money to Jackson's pooled trust run through this particular company. And the money's sent to that company, and Jackson has a little subfolder within their big pooled set of assets of a lot of people. And then they pay the taxes, they invest it, they manage it. And then when Jackson passes away, depending upon the way the pool trust is set up, it can either go to a beneficiary or it can just be acquired by that nonprofit and used for the benefit of other people. So it's not a super common tool, but pooled special needs trust would be a good option. Like if it's an only child, there's not a lot of assets, there's really not anyone else to run, the trust for you, and you just want to be hands off with it. Revocable just means things can be changed, and a revocable trust does avoid probate. Irrevocable means it can't be changed. And typically, once we pass away, our trusts become irrevocable because it's the last word and testament of Jenny. There are some other types of trusts. There's probably 20 different kinds of trusts. So just work with your estate planning attorney to figure out what the best plan is for you. Most of our clients use a revocable family trust for our assets up here for mom and dad, and then either the provision or the standalone. But some families, they don't want to leave assets to their other kids. And so what they'll do is they'll create a special needs trust for that one child, and then everything else gets left through a charitable trust to different organizations and some to their family. Or one of our clients created an irrevocable life insurance trust. So they have that testamentary will up top, and then it looks like we have an artist on there. But some families have the revocable, or they have their testamentary will, and then it gets dropped down to the kids through a life insurance trust. So, just lots of things to consider. Okay, these are slides that I'm going to put up for just a moment, and then I will want you to come back and look at these because they're different case studies, and I've tried to represent a lot of different types of families that I work with. But this is Marty, 17 years old today. His parents are 54 and 53. They want Marty to have about $4,000 to get to the end of his life each month. So once we did the calculation, it will take 3 million from when dad dies at 85 to support Marty from the time Marty is 48 to when Marty gets to be 85. So you can see the calculations down there at the bottom, and these are some strategies of how we can get there. If you just have, a nice $620,000 sitting around, let's invest that for you and make that work for you at 6%. But a lot of families don't have that. And so here's some other strategies. Utilizing the life insurance, lots of options on how to do that. Utilize an ABLE account. We're not proponents of debt, but if you have a debit card, let's say you go to Walmart, you spend $19.50 on something, and then you have a dedicated savings account that will round that up to $20. And then that 50 cents will go into like a dedicated savings account that can pay for, accumulate and pay for life insurance. Or your Costco rebates. When you get your rebate check, reallocate your budget, and whatever you're saving through your rebate check, use and just stick it into an ABLE account. Did you know that if you save $20 each week for 1 year, you will save over $1,000? And that can be leveraged to buy life insurance to fund the trust. Here's another example. Here's a single parent. Sally Samples, 35, her daughter Lindsay's 10. So how is she going to do this? How is she going to put her plan together? So first of all, we want to make sure that Lindsay is tapped into all of the subsidies possible. So we want to get her on housing lists when she gets to be a little bit older. We want to make sure she's tapping into Social Security because most likely she'll qualify now because mom's income is so low. Medicaid. We want to maybe look at that testamentary will where it's going to create the trust once mom passes away, since mom probably doesn't have enough money to do a full estate plan right now. Again, one piece I want to highlight right there is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the fourth bullet. The beneficiary should be the will of the insured. So remember, mom doesn't have a spouse to leave her life insurance to, because typically it goes to the spouse first. And we aren't leaving it to the trust because the trust it has not been created yet. So we want to leave the life insurance policy to the will of the insured. So mom's will create Lindsay's special needs trust once she passes away, and then that life insurance will go straight there, slick, really smooth, and we can ensure that the money gets to her daughter. So again, come back and read these bullets. The other thing is just cash value can grow over time. Make sure you're paying those premiums, because if you don't pay them, then, of course, the insurance is going to lapse, and then all the planning that you've done, it won't fund the trust. And save or invest $50 per month in an ABLE account. And you're going to look at these figures and you're going to think, gosh, that's not a lot of money. But this mom's on a limited budget, and it's more than she had saved. So if after 11 years, that will grow, and there will be over $9,000. And then after 20 years, there'll be over $20,000. And so that's better than nothing. And if mom's leaving Lindsay to mom's sister, that's going to give mom's sister at least a little nest egg to get started. And again, there's another calculation there that you can come back and read. Okay, let's do just one or two more. A two-income stream family. Bob and Susan are both 35. They have 3 children, and so they make about $150,000 a year. What could they do? So their child is eligible for Social Security. They're tapping into that. They have a will and revocable trust. Make sure all the beneficiary designations are coordinated to make sure it's funding the trust and not just going straight to the child. And also just contribute what you can to the ABLE account. But again, there's strategy there about how much you put in the ABLE and how much you're putting in the trust. So let us help you there. And then here's that piece that I want to talk about again, just to make sure you recognize. That second to die policy is huge. It's less expensive than normal life insurance. It's funded directly to Jackson's trust. So I can use the assets that Ryan and I have accumulated from our lives, our retirement, our long-term health care, and potentially the other kids. And then that second to die policy is really what's going to fund all of Jackson's needs. We could just make it, $1 million going right into the trust, done. So that's really slick. Let's see. The other one that I want to cover, and again, come back and read the bullets, grandparents. A lot of people are raising grandchildren right now. And so work with us to help figure out what that looks like. One family I'm working with in Illinois, grandparents were putting money into that child's 529 account, and that child isn't going to need that. And so instead of putting it in a 529, because they wanted it to be fair to all the grandkids, the grandparents are now contributing to a second to die policy. So once that second grandparent passes away, that money is going to go right into the special needs trust. So it's the same amount of money as what they were putting into that child's 529. Now they're paying for that second to die policy, and pretty soon $1 million is going to go right into that grandchild's account. So work with your parents. If they're putting away money right now that your child's probably not going to need, let's think of a different strategy. And just to wrap up tonight, 2 out of 3 American adults do not have a will, and our families are different. Our families, our children, Jackson is depending upon me to plan for him. And so here's the final 3 steps. Implementation. We just need to get to work. Find out what your next right step is. And then also, don't plan in a silo. So again, we need to talk to the players that are involved. Who's going to handle medical? My sister's a nurse. She's the best person for that. My brother is a great finance guy. He would be a great person to help with the trust. I also have America First on board. They're my corporate trustee. So they're going to be the ones paying the taxes, filing all the maintenance reports on it. They're going to invest it for me, but then my brother will help with the day-to-day. So you can have a lot of people involved. And this is a really good template that I have for families as well. Here's Jackson in one of his classic Star Wars t-shirts. We're not planning on you guys leaving any money to Jackson, but if you do, please use our special needs trust. It's detrimental to Jackson if you don't. And then the last piece is just review it. Great, we've got it done. And then just glance at it in a year. Set a reminder on your calendar, on your Google Calendar, to remind you to review it. Meet with your attorney every 1 year to 3 years and just update things, because there's things in life that are always changing. So the market changes again. Just today with the tariff announcement, the market was a little crazy today. Tax laws change every single year. The government benefits change. We have Medicaid today. We might not have Medicaid tomorrow. And eligibility requirements change. The waiver benefits always change. So kind of just keep this in your planning process of having a plan of when you're going to update this and review it. And just 2 little quotes to finish. The hardcore truth is that we all have an expiration date on our mortality. We have three choices on how to handle that reality. We can deny it, we can ignore it, or we can plan for it. And I know most of us, there's kind of a saying in this community, our goal is to live one day longer than our child. And that's really true. And then the last piece, one of my favorite quotes that I've adapted from The Water Giver is parenthood is about raising and celebrating the child you have, not the child you thought you would have. It's about understanding your child is exactly the person they are supposed to be. And if you're lucky, they might be the teacher who turns you into the person you're supposed to be. So CaringTide does have a partner family program where we work with you, figure out where you are, and help you find your next right step. And I will just leave this slide up if you want to have a free 30-minute consultation. We do offer that to you. You can use that link, caringtide.com/meet, or you can scan that QR code. And let me just stop right there. You guys can unmute and I'll answer any questions that you guys have. You guys were really quiet in the chat, so you must be great planners. Any questions or something I can clarify for you? I know that was super fast. Okay. All right. Well, we just appreciate you joining us tonight. Again, we'd be happy to help you and look to see what you've already put together from, in your process and help you find what your next right step is. I know, Vanessa, there's too much new information. It's a lot. And feel free to unmute if there's something that you feel a little overwhelmed with, and I can talk you through it really quick. But it's just about moving forward, whether all you're going to do in the next week is call DSPD and get on the list, or whether it's just, looking to see if you have an ABLE account. Happy to help you wherever you are.
Thank you, Jenny. I've listened to you present before, and every time I hear you present this information, I feel like I learned something new. I was scribbling down some notes tonight. It's a lot of information, but it's all really good information that we need to have so we can start to have those discussions with our family and our family members. And I just want to applaud everybody who came tonight because this is not an easy topic to think about. There's a wealth of information and there's some things that we don't really want to think about that we have to think about when we do this. So you guys are all amazing for being here and taking that first step to start planning for the future for your family.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And we hope to see you in a consultation and on the next webinar. Thank you, Sylvia. We appreciate this opportunity.